Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Philip Seaton. Today I'm going to be talking about Taiga dramas and tourism. Has anybody ever visited a film location? Has anybody ever visited Universal Studios, Disneyland, or another place linked to film? If so, then you have been a film tourist, someone who has wholly or partially been influenced to visit a place because of film. I am involved in a research project into content tourism. Now, this is a really exciting theoretical development that has been developed in Japan by Japanese scholars, and it's related to film tourism. Basically, content refers to the narratives, characters, locations, music, and other creative elements that appear in films. And content tourism is how these elements stimulate people to travel. But because this talk is being given as part of Sustainability Weeks, I also want to think of content tourism in terms of its sustainability. Now, UNESCO defines sustainable tourism as tourism that respects both local people and the traveller, cultural heritage, and the environment. But we can also think of sustainability in an economic sense. Is a tourism site related to film economically sustainable in the long run? Now, this gives a good example of the problem. This is a film location site in Yubari, in the center of Hokkaido. It is the location for a film called The Yellow Handkerchief of Happiness, which was very popular when it came out in 1977. But how long can a site like this maintain its popularity once the popularity of the film has passed? But today I'm going to think about historical tourism as a form of sustainable content tourism. I'm going to do this by looking at a few TV dramas with historical characters and the tourism booms created by them. I'm going to be looking at two Taiga dramas, Shinsengumi, broadcast in 2004, and Ryomaden, broadcast in 2010. Now, these are flagship historical dramas broadcast on NHK. They focus on a hero, a main character, and the dramas continue basically for an entire year. These dramas typically trigger a large tourism boom to the locations featured in the drama. Now, this graphic shows the extent of those tourism booms in the locations where dramas have been set since 2003. Now, the two dramas that I'll be talking about today are in these two locations, and as you can see, there's a very significant economic impact in these places. Now, you'll notice that there's actually two figures listed there. The figures in the brackets are higher than the first figures, and that's because the Bank of Japan, who wrote these estimates, they were forced to revise upwards their estimates of the tourism boom based on the large number of people who were visiting, having seen the drama, presumably. Now, it's not only in terms of their economic impacts that these two dramas are a good comparison. Both are set in the Bakumatsu period. Bakumatsu is 1853 to 68. They both have lots of locations in Kyoto, and they both feature very popular heroes of this period. In Shinsengumi, there was Hijikata Toshizo, who, as you can see from the photo there, is a sort of dashing figure of a samurai man and has lots of particularly female fans these days. And on the right, Sakamoto Ryoma, who is one of the great visionaries of this period. So let's go to our first location, Kyoto. In the 1860s, Kyoto was the scene of a violent power struggle between the defenders of the existing order, the Tokugawa shogunate, and those who wanted to overthrow the shogunate and introduce a new era of modernization to Japan. Hijikata Toshizo was part of the Shinsengumi, which was a corps created to protect the shogun on his trip to Kyoto in 1863. Meanwhile, Sakamoto Ryoma was one of the shishi, the men of high principles, as they were known, who were actively campaigning against the Tokugawa shogunate at this time in Kyoto. Now, this is the Ryozen Museum of History in Kyoto, and This is me being a typical drama tourist in Shinsengumi costume, having my photograph taken between a picture of Hijikata and Sakamoto Ryoma. Now, I show this picture mainly to illustrate that these two historical figures are extremely important characters in the context of this museum's exhibits, which helps to explain this data. These are the visitor numbers to the Ryozen Museum of History from 2000 up to 2011. Now, if you look in 2004, you can see a very large increase in the number of visitors coinciding with the broadcast of the Shinsengumi drama. In 2010, we have a similar peak in tourist numbers that coincides with the broadcast of Ryomaden about Sakamoto. Notice also how in the year before the peak there's a sort of lead-in, and that's because NHK announces the topic of its drama 18 months in advance, and then people who are interested in learning a bit more about the drama the following year, they will head to the museum. There's also a very steep drop-off in the year after the drama is broadcast, which shows that these dramas produce a very strong boost, but it's only a temporary boost to the tourism industry. It's not only at this museum that we've been able to see this kind of pattern. At the Mubadala Temple in Kyoto, which was the base for the Shinsengumi in the early 1860s and which contains the graves of a number of Shinsengumi members, I asked the staff about the tourist levels in 2004. They said there were busloads of tourists. But then the following year, the buses stopped coming and visitor levels returned to normal. Let's now move away from Kyoto and go to Hino. This is in Tokyo, it's in western Tokyo, and it's a very important site related to the Shinsengumi. A number of the Shinsengumi members came from this city, including Hijikata Toshizo. But there were a number of reasons why this particular site did not gain a large amount of revenue or economic boost from the tourism boom. Let's have a look why. First of all, Hino is situated very close to the center of Tokyo. It's within easy commuting distance. What this means in practical tourism terms is that the city was not able to attract lots of overnight tourists. Overnight tourists are the key to a really vibrant tourism sector. People spend a lot more money when they stay the night in a hotel compared to when they're just on a day trip. A second reason is the type of sites that we find in Hino. These are two small museums, the Hijikata Toshizo Museum and the Inoue Genzaburo Museum. Now, these museums are both very significant for Shinsengumi fans because they're run by the descendants of the Shinsengumi members, but they're only open a few days a month, and the entrance fee is very nominal, which means that these museums really aren't being run for any kind of financial motives. They're really about displaying family heirlooms. And here's the major museum in Hino about the Shinsengumi, the home of the Shinsengumi Historical Museum. But this particular museum was only opened in 2005, the year after the drama was broadcast, so it wasn't able to take advantage of the drama. In any case, there would be negligible economic benefits for the city for this particular museum. The reason is that it's had about 10,000 visitors per year since it's opened, and that's they're charging 200 yen in entrance fees. That's not enough to pay one full-time member of staff. What we effectively have in Hino is the local authorities subsidizing the tourism industry so that they can generate a sense of local identity, history, and pride. So, I want to think about Taiga drama booms within a sustainable tourism strategy. And this really leads me to 5 conclusions. The first is that stories and characters from Japanese history are often highly sustainable tourist resources, particularly in contrast to the stories and narratives that we find in fictional film. This is because the characters are an established part of Japanese history and culture, and so their stories keep on coming up again and again. Therefore, there are repeated booms as people go back to these sites again. But even when we do have these sites that can take advantage of existing booms, they should base their business model on the visitor numbers in ordinary years. It's very risky to try and build your business model using peak year data. But at the same time, these locations, they should be very ready to take advantage of any booms that do come their way. They can really help to get the tourist site through the leaner years, as it were. Also, these locations should encourage their visitors to stay overnight. When you have people staying in hotels and buying dinner in the evening, that's when you can really start to make a large profit out of a tourism sector. But finally, contents tourism should be integrated into a broader tourism strategy. There are very few people who go to a location simply to visit a film tourism site. They typically like to have a more diverse experience. So the more that a location with prime historical contents can diversify its tourism industry, the better it is for that locality. There's a lot of attention these days on Japanese popular culture. The Japanese government has its Cool Japan strategy. But I'd like to focus on contents tourism as one of the key growth areas for Japanese tourism in the coming years. And the reason for, I think one of the results is going to be that when people visit Japan, they're going to be as interested in visiting a manga site or a history site as they are of going to a temple or getting some local food. So this is really one of the real growth areas in not only academia, but also in terms of tourism strategy for the next decade or two. And I will be continuing this research with colleagues of mine in the Center for Advanced Tourism Studies and elsewhere at Hokkaido University. And in particular, when people start coming and studying on the Modern Japanese Studies program, I'll be really looking forward to hearing how our students go off around the country and visit sites related to their interests, their contents interests. Thank you very much.